You know, this sort of shit is why people hate woke culture BS. I miss the days where you could just hate any character you wanted, and you wouldn't be called a bigot for doing so by idiots who have no idea what bigotry actually is. Like, seriously. So on Discord, I was shown an article that is exactly the Rey and Reva third sister garbage all over again, except it concerns the protagonist of Star Wars Outlaws. I was originally going to talk about the Outlaws reveal, but since this is now the subject of discussion, I'm gonna sum up my thoughts. The name is kinda lame, and the gameplay shown wasn't very interesting, but that might be because it's under Ubisoft, and Ubisoft isn't known for innovative open world design. I know that with the Assassin's Creed games, which I followed since 2014, and also played the game since 2007, they recycle the same design for the open world over and over again. If there was ever a company I didn't want to make an open world Star Wars game, it was Ubisoft. But we all know that Disney are incredibly out of touch with who they let write Star Wars stories. Just look at Taika Waititi. That idiot forgot Natalie Portman was in Star Wars, and he wasn't fired immediately despite that. Like, seriously, is that who you're getting to make Star Wars stories? People who are very incapable of knowing basic Star Wars lore, and also have the same mentality of being OT purity, prequel-hating sequel defenders. No wonder there's been a decline in quality. But back on topic, this article was just pathetic. The premise is basically alleging a controversy around the race and gender of the player character. Of fucking course. The writer of the article provides no evidence for any of this. And at this point, the racist, sexist, homophobic narratives around X characters whatever is getting old. It's an empty article if I've ever seen one. Now, something I have to point out for the 50th time is that Disney are only pretending to be inclusive to look good, and they couldn't care less about anything other than profits. Always remember that Disney is the same company that gave a Chinese concentration camp, or at least the regional government special thanks in the credits of the Mulan remake. That camp in question is a human rights violation. They just wanted to appease the Chinese government. Also, remember how they censored Black Panther in the Chinese poster because they knew touting a black guy wouldn't be received so well in China? When push comes to shove, Disney are literally racists themselves pretending to be multiculturalists. But if something gets in the way of their profits, they'll immediately backtrack to appease whoever, regardless of what's right. I wish those defending Rey or Reva or whoever would realize that. Sure, individual authors who work on Disney properties may believe in inclusivity, but Disney as a company doesn't. If the far right was what was considered politically correct instead, you bet Disney would hamper towards that side instead. It's a facade to get the most amount of people to support them with the least amount of effort. If they truly cared about the issue of racism, they wouldn't have tried to appease the Chinese government. But China is where the big bucks are made, so they folded like a chair in a nanosecond. The only exception I can think of is Lightyear, which was banned for a same-sex kiss that could easily be cut out. Point is, Disney is happy to look the other way if it means making money, and nobody should ever forget that. They are not allies of the LGBT. Disney defenders never consider that people might be pissed for reasons like that. That's a big reason I call out the woke BS, because it isn't sincere in the slightest. Disney as a company couldn't care less, and no Disney Star Wars defender brings any of this up, because it would obliterate everything they believe in. The day someone is crazy enough to directly address these things and defend it will probably never come. Anyways, you know how this relates to this video. Disney's tweet condemning racism after Kenobi came out was them claiming the moral high ground, when it's utterly hypocritical. But let's start with Rey. The article I pointed out refers to the Mary Sue shit as allegations, which I mean, is there even a case for Rey not being a Mary Sue at this point? George Lucas confirmed a long time ago that training is an absolute requirement to learn the ways of the Force. It isn't something you just believe in to get all the powers.
Training to become a Jedi is not an easy challenge. And even if you succeed, it's a hard life.
I already explained all this looking at Rey from a lore perspective because she's a terribly written Star Wars character. The rules dictate training is required. End of story. I know that Sam Maggot said on Twitter that people only dislike Rey because she's a woman, and she was pretty much taunting the people who didn't like Rey. Something I have to point out is that this can all be done in reverse. Disney have tried presenting Rey as the female Star Wars character, and all the arguments made that she sucks are ignored. So I have to ask, is the reason you like Rey is because she's a woman? Arguing that she's the first female Star Wars protagonist is dead wrong. There's plenty if you go looking, but you'd have to look into the books and comics, and stuff that's not as easily accessible as the films. You see, the films and shows are all that exists to these normies who have no idea what a Revan is. Their only context for Thrawn is Star Wars Rebels, and so on and so forth. Also, can't it be argued that Leia and Padme were protagonists, just not the main protagonist? Like, you've got your representation. Why do you care so much that they be given the pivotal main role? At that point, there were 6 Star Wars films, and they were all focused on the story of the same character, Anakin Skywalker. That's another reason the sequel trilogy completely missed the point of George Lucas's saga. Regardless of whether Rey gets the spot of the trilogy, they still have to tail it back to the story of Anakin Skywalker, maybe on his reflection after becoming a Force ghost or whatever. The sequel trilogy, like it or not, could not be about Rey specifically if they wanted to continue the saga, which is a point a lot of the Disney Star Wars defenders never acknowledge. Because they didn't like the prequels which retroactively made the whole saga about Anakin Skywalker. That's a criticism I have about Rey, that she overhauls the story by making everything about her, and undoes the achievements of every legacy character, whether it be Anakin Skywalker, Luke, or whoever. Rey Skywalker was not earned. It was merely given to her by the writers. That's the thing about modern Star Wars. It's a lack of earning anything. So those are the actual reasons people don't like Rey. Also, does anyone have a source complaining that Rey was a woman before The Force Awakens came out? Because people only started making this whole sexism argument after we saw the character in play. Let's move on to Reva the Third Sister. I want to point out first that people who tried making out that racism was a big deal in the Star Wars fanbase were dead silent about the shit Cameron Monaghan, who plays Cal Kestis, had to go through when Fallen Order was announced and people were going out tweeting that he was a boring white male protagonist. I also believe there were some articles made saying that. I don't remember Disney condemning racist and sexist fans after that whole fiasco. I guess it's because calling out the double standard of straight white males getting shit too wouldn't make for a bombshell story. Especially since the same kind of people who called Cal Kestis a boring white male protagonist screeched about racism concerning Moses Ingram. I should have mentioned this in my rebuttal of racist Star Wars fans, but hey, I'm mentioning this now. From what I've seen, the most they showed were hateful messages coming from random people on Instagram. Which, I mean, yeah, that really sucks. But is it enough to pretend that Star Wars fans specifically are racist? Especially since Cameron Monaghan went through the same thing in the exact same situation, except people were more open with their anti-white agenda given public tweets. You know, I'm convinced that all this crap only applies to people Disney specifically hire for representation purposes to make themselves look good. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Disney who sent Moses Ingram those hateful messages. I mean, they supposedly told her that she would get racist messages. Call it a conspiracy theory, but the whole thing seems too planned out. If you're a straight white male that's hired to be the lead in a Jedi adventure game, you don't get the same treatment. And that, in my opinion, is what real racism looks like. I mean, the article tries to say that quote-unquote misogynists were quiet when they got white male protagonists and never acknowledge the double standard that happened. I mean, why is it always Rey or Reva? There's plenty of people who don't like Ezra Bridger, who isn't even white. What about Han Solo in relation to Solo: A Star Wars Story? Or is it a non-issue because they have penises and don't make us as big a controversy as a black woman because of ignoring the double standard? Anyone crying racism, sexism, or homophobia, learn what bigotry actually is. Because guess what? Racism and sexism also happen to white male actors and characters in relation to Star Wars. It's just that a black female would create more buzz and controversy, so that's why that's the topic of discussion. It's Disney being hypocritical as usual, but I can't say I'm surprised. So that's my case. We haven't even seen what Outlaws protagonist Kay Vess is gonna be like, so I'll reserve judgment until we see more. I'm Juju Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories by mystery boxes?
Under the mountain.